Leontyne Price very much inspired Masterclass. When I finally met her at the Kennedy Center Honors, I said I should really be paying you royalties, and I told her how I was teaching playwriting at Juilliard and feeling very frustrated because teaching is hard. I think they're born teachers, and I was very frustrated with my students, and in the elevator it said, Masterclass with Leontyne Price, 4 p.m., and I looked at my watch and it was like 3:59, so I flashed my faculty card and got a nice seat. It was packed, and she came out and got a huge ovation from everybody, and she said, please, this isn't about me, we're here to work. And I thought, And then a student came out and started singing. I remember Come Scolio from Così, and Price said, let me show you how this goes. And she had officially retired at this point, and she started singing Come Scolio in full voice, and it was fantastic. Tore the house down, and she said, maybe I quit a little sooner than I should have, as a joke, but she was in good voice that day. And I thought, and she kept saying, but this isn't about me, don't applaud, don't applaud. Now you try it. And of course, it was about her too, and it went from great intimacy between teacher and student, and here we are paying our respect, our homage to a great diva. And I said, this is the essence of theater, what's going on here. And then a few weeks later, I was at an event and someone was performing a scene from a play of mine, Lisbon Traviata, talking about what Callas had meant to them, and suddenly the idea for Masterclass about Maria Callas came to mind. And I started writing it on the back of the program, though I very much say it's Leontyne Price's Masterclass that inspired me to write this play, and I do owe her some royalties. It's maybe the first time I heard her live, and she gave so many memorable performances, but my favorite Price experience will always be Leonora in Trovatore. Maybe it was because it was the first thing she sang at the Met, but that is one of the great roles to me, and you so seldom hear it sung with a kind of sumptuous, majestic tone that Verdi surely wanted. And there it was, and she was young and beautiful and just everything you dreamed of in that part. But God, the operas I loved her in. So many, I mean, and I think I saw just about everything she did at the Met. But I remember her from NBC television when I was growing up. There she was as Tosca and Pamina, and I think she did, my memory is she did Dialogue of the Carmelites too. I think I saw her 3 times singing in English. So she was a voice to reckon with, and she made rather a late Met debut. We all heard about her, and of course there was a legendary Blue album with the arias, and no one had heard that aria from La Rondine before. It was brand new music at that point. I mean, Puccini, Il Tridico was very unfamiliar music, and suddenly there that track came out of the speakers, and to this day people say, you know what the single most beautiful example of the human voice is on record? Leontyne Price singing Il Bel Sogno di Doretta, and so it's a benchmark performance that will always be in print. Victor was very naughty when CDs came out. You had to buy a huge album to get it, and most of us did, because finally they put out the whole original Blue album, but you used to have to buy these big anthologies to get that aria. I saw her as Aida many times, and at her farewell performance, which I did not attend, but I saw it on TV, the ovation after the O Patria Mia is what theater and opera is all about. That was one of the most moving moments, tributes from a public who has loved an artist for many years, at her saying goodbye to them. It's a profoundly moving moment, and I'm so glad it's been preserved on film, because I know what's great about theater is that you have to be there, but every so often they do preserve the right moments in other generations, or people like me who were not lucky enough to have a ticket for the last Aida. The opening of the new Met with Cleopatra is one of those moments you wish you could go back and undo the furor, and they could have calmly just performed. I think it was a much better opera than anyone gave it credit for. There was much confusion and hysteria, and the set worked, it didn't work. I remember when I saw it, people thought the mobile or the sculpture on the proscenium of the Met was part of the scenery, because no one had been in that theater before. And you know the sculpture on top of the proscenium? He said, oh, look, the set goes way up there. Then the next night when you went again, oh, it's still there. It wasn't part of the set, but it was all very, I just wish the Met had given it a second season and let everyone take a deep breath, and including the composer. And I mean, he's done some wonderful revisions, and I'm sure Leontyne Price would have loved to have sung that one more time. There was no way you could live up to expectations maybe that night, but I'm awfully glad I saw it. It's one of the memorable things she did, and it was a great event, the opening of a new Metropolitan, a new American opera by our greatest soprano. It was glorious, and I'm sorry its history looks somewhat askance at that evening. It was much better than people who say they were there remembered as, or writers. I think I would describe Leontyne Price's voice as something very tactile. So I think of a fur, like mink, dark, glamorous mink. It was a very tactile voice. You could touch it when you heard it at the Met. Very few people have that quality, a tactile voice, but that's what she had. And I think of mink, sable, something you just can wrap yourself in. Also, her voice was the real thing. She opened her mouth and you sat back and, leave the singing to her. So many voices are a series of problem solvings. And, oh God, they're going to get through somehow this aria. With Price, it was the real voice, and it was a very honest singing. Well, she didn't have to cheat. I mean, she had that instrument. But I think I would say spectacular, majestic, mink. She is absolutely an American heroine, and her story always moved me. I mean, coming from a small town and ending up on the great stages of the world, that should inspire anyone. It sure inspired me when I was a kid, her story, and it still does. It's very moving. I love the fact that she's been so generous acknowledging the people who helped her and recognized that talent and made sure she got the education and training. She's been very generous and always acknowledging them. And I think it's an incredible story, and you cannot erase the fact that she was the first. She wasn't the first Black American to sing at the Met, but she was the first Black American to become the great American soprano, and not a token. It was beyond. She was not a black soprano when she sang at the Met. She was the great American soprano. It's a story I think we should be proud of as a society and learn from it, and how important the arts are, that when recognize in a young person that seed of talent, it must be developed and encouraged and nurtured. And if it's not, to think that voice could have stayed in Laurel, Mississippi is tragic. But there are people there, including her parents, who sacrificed for her. And that's so important. And I hope people learn from her story. It should be a very famous story. Everyone should know the story of Leontyne Price, because it gives hope to all of us. There are a lot of rumors when her last recital was actually going to be, and we were all told, go up to New Haven. It's going to be the last time. She doesn't want it announced, but it's going to be the last recital. So there she is in New Haven, and the audience is going wild because everybody was thinking this is the last one. And she was incredibly generous with the encores, and there were big arias, Pace Pace, Visitarte. After singing for 2 hours, she's doing big, long, difficult arias with high notes, the whole thing. And finally, the accompanist said to her, Lee, you can't go on like this. She says, they're all on their feet except for that guy in the third row. I'm going to keep singing till he stands. He said, Lee, he's in a wheelchair. Oh, she said, now you tell me. I think it's a great story. She was going to get that entire audience on its feet. And that man in the wheelchair was standing. Maybe he couldn't. But if anyone could have gotten him to his feet, it would have been her that night. But I think that's such a great story of the spirit of a performer who's going to give you their all. The difference he has made at the Met is remarkable. I mean, the excellence in the orchestral playing rose quantum since he took over. And also the Met was very much in danger of being a musical museum. And I'm sure he's the spirit and drive behind the really adventurous repertory, the new music, the more obscure off-the-beaten-track operas. And he's been wonderful that way. I think what I most admire about James Levine is he loses himself in the music. I grew up, you know, did you hear Toscanini? Did you hear Von Karajan? And they were very egocentric conductors. He seems to me the exact opposite of, say, Leonard Bernstein, who was a wonderful, great conductor, but it was always Lenny's this, Lenny's that. Levine seems to lose himself in the music, and I think the most memorable performances of his, for me, have been in Wagner and Mittelverdi. There were a couple of seasons of Parsifal with Christa Ludwig and John Vickers, and you say, nothing gets better than this. The orchestra, the ensemble, the singing, everything about it. And but again, I wouldn't say it was his interpretation. It was Wagner's Parsifal I was hearing. And I always feel that with him when I think he does Don Carlo, especially, one of my favorites. And I felt I was listening to Verdi, not Levine's Don Carlo. And I mean that as a great compliment that he's an egoless conductor, but obviously one of the greatest conductors we've ever had in this country. But I think that's what's so remarkable. And I grew up on the Toscanini records, and those are interpretations, you know. Toscanini's Bohème, Toscanini's Traviata, and with Levine we're getting Verdi's. And that's a real change, I think, in our feeling about a conductor. Well, I mean, the first example would be when the Met did Les Troyens. I mean, to think a masterpiece of that scale was unknown to an American audience. It's like the Sistine Chapel had been hidden and no one knew it was there. It was this huge canvas. And that was a breathtaking when the Met first did that. And the Janacek operas were really totally unknown here. And now these are some of his repertory that he does not conduct, but I think he is the musical director, and obviously this is music he wants us to hear. We're getting a wonderful sample of the size of the Britain repertory now, which is great. And then there are the new pieces. We have Dr. Atomic coming very, very soon, and we've had several American premieres. And the point is not that they're successful or enter the standard repertory at once. The point is they're being done, and then there's a chance for a second performance, a second production. But they have to be done originally. And the Met doing these operas, the Met gives them a credibility for an audience that they don't have when a smaller, less important theater takes them on. So I think it's very, very important that he's embraced this new century we live in. And you feel very much his enthusiasm for the new repertoire, even if he's not conducting the piece itself. And I think that's, you know, a musical director is more than just conducting your performances. It's really being responsible for all 7 performances that week. And I think I feel his hand everywhere, even when he's not at the podium. And that's a nice thing. I don't think his interpretations have changed radically. I think they've deepened. Don Carlo is an example of an opera I think just gets better every time the Met brings it back. His Parsifal has grown enormously. The Ring, and it's wonderful when he musically slums and does, you know, a Donizetti, say, you know. It's wonderful because he treats it so freshly. I remember when he does Andrea Chenier, it's just a serious piece of music. I mean, he doesn't patronize it when he does the less dignified pieces, and that's wonderful. I think he treats music with great respect, and as I said, the composer comes first. I know that should be obvious, but it's not always. You don't feel someone screaming my interpretation at you. They're saying, this is the music Wagner, Verdi wrote, and that's rare. That's rare. When I first came to New York in 1956, you know, every time there was a horn passage, there was groans from the audience. There were so many missed notes, and you know, the intonation and the ensemble it was not a first-rate orchestra. No one thought it was. There were some of the greatest voices you ever heard up there, but no one thought the orchestra was great. And it was something we didn't really talk about, the Met Orchestra. And then suddenly under Levine, you know, it's orchestra we pay good money to hear in Carnegie Hall playing orchestral music. We don't need a singer. We can go for an evening of Mahler, and it's an extraordinary achievement. And it happened pretty quickly, I think. The change happened very quickly, but the refinement, where now the Met is absolutely world-class orchestra that belongs in any concert hall in the world when it's not in the pit at Lincoln Center. And that's all to his credit. I think the acceptance of new, difficult music has grown incredibly because of him. And I think having him in the pit when they do a difficult piece makes a huge difference to the audience, because just 3 days ago we loved him conducting Manon Lescaut, so now he's conducting Schoenberg. That's okay, you know, it gives it a credibility or a willingness to try to go, let this man take us with him, because this is obviously something that interests him. We should give it a try, you know. It's so easy to just say, I want to hear the same music over and over, and he doesn't conduct the same music over and over, and he doesn't let the Met audience hear the same operas over and over. And that's been very smart. And it's slow. That's slow progress. There are always empty seats at the intermission of Pelléas, and I know he loves that piece and he conducts it magnificently. And I'm sure he is a little sad when he sees those patches of seats. But there used to be half the house left after the first act of Pelléas. Now it's maybe, you know, 20%, and next time they do it, it'll be 15. So he's doing the right thing, and but we need a leader of that kind of stature to go with. Trust. He has a great element of trust with his audience, and God knows he's beloved. I mean, the ovation just when he comes out at the beginning of a performance before he lifts his baton is so genuine and heartfelt, and it's been that way for many years now. That's a real love affair, James Levine and the Met audience. Well, with Verdi, I think he absolutely gets the passion and the classical underpinnings. So it's, you know, you're listening to the music of a great composer, not just famous artists. He sees the shape of whole acts of Verdi, and especially an opera like Don Carlos, which is so huge in its scale, the musical architecture. He really makes sure you see it or feel it. And in Wagner, I think his main quality is he hears the music, the singing in all the orchestral parts. And whenever I go to a Wagner performance of Maestro Levine, I hear things in the orchestra I never heard before. And it's not showing off like, oh, listen to this, you know, oboe here, or this passage. It just seems so right, and like, where's that been? And he just highlights, and it's lovely the way he understands the rich texture. And so many Wagnerian just sort of go for the main tune or the big sound, and I lose the almost chamber music quality that's very often in some of the quieter scenes in Wagner. There's a self-confidence, a boldness about it. It makes me want to listen harder, and I feel if I'm not getting it, it may be my fault. And he makes me want to go there and embrace these pieces. He certainly has made me fall in love with Wozzeck, which I remember when the Met first did at the Old Theater, the opening night. I believe Carl Böhm conducted it. Eleanor Staber and Herman Ude. It was difficult music. Now I think it's one of the most beautiful, lyrical, sensual operas ever written. Same thing with Lulu, which was really tough the first season or so for most people. And look how the acceptance of Lulu is extraordinary. And that's all due to him. And some music you don't get on one hearing. And Berg is one of those composers. But he makes you want to come back and hear it again, which is very, very important. I think people used to think Wozzeck and Lulu were music by a madman. They don't think that anymore. So that's quite an achievement right there. Well, you always feel he's really listening to the singers, really listening moment to moment, bar to bar, which is, I think, what a great conductor should do. And I think a lot of conductors got their head in the score and they want to go faster, slower, whatever, but not really in the moment with the singer. And I think it's such an intense collaboration, conductor and singer. I also believe the conductor is the single most important person in a performance. It's the first thing I ask. I don't care what the opera is, whether Moses and Aaron or La Boheme, who's conducting, because you can have the four greatest voices in the world doing Boheme or Trovatore, but it's not going to be a great night at the opera if you don't have the right maestro in the pit. And Levine is always the right maestro in the pit. And you wish he could conduct everything, but he can't. And fortunately, there are some other pretty good conductors out there, too. But I'm so glad the emphasis is back on who's conducting tonight, because when I first got to New York, the old Met, there was an occasional high-profile guest conductor, but who's singing was always the question. And I think the question should be who's conducting, then who's singing. What he's done for opera in this country? Well, by raising the standard of the orchestral playing at the Met and by expanding the repertoire significantly, he has challenged every opera company not to just do another season of La Boheme, Traviata, and Carmen. How can you keep repeating those same old wonderful operas when people say, hey, the Met's doing Mahagoni, the Met's doing Lulu, the Met's doing Moses and Aaron, the Met's doing Benjamin Britten. So I think he set a standard, and these other theaters, I'm amazed when you see a relatively small opera company is tackling a very ambitious, difficult new piece. And that has to be the influence of James Levine. So that's a huge one.